Hi folks, Slices here. I've always liked little knives, and I have quite a few of them. And before we had all these ridiculous sort of war on knives in the UK, I used to carry a little knife, a little tiny knife, this one here, every day. And it did 90% of everything that I ever wanted of it. I always used to have a bigger knife around for doing things like spreading cream cheese on my baguette at lunchtime and things like that, because this was just a wee bit too small for doing jobs like that. But for most of the cutting tasks during the day, opening letters, cutting strings, cords, anything that required a knife, this would do me fine. But Paddy Potato Peelers put out, Stephen that is, put out an open tag the other day, and he was talking about wee big knives. Now I've done some sort of contrasts between some of these sort of tiny little knives that I own, like this little tiny little Higanakami here, bigger Higanakami to compare it to, the little case Mini Hunter, the Volt knife a couple of years ago, compared to a sort of full-size Hunter. It's this tiny little baby. But what I think Paddy was on about was not little knives versus big knives, but little knives that work, that can do the work of a big knife. And I have a few of those. Let me just put these out of the way before I hurt myself again. Oops. Put up there, over there, push this up here, and what he really meant was knives that can do both ends of the spectrum. And for this, or one of the ones for this that he produced, was the Dragonfly from Spyderco. Now, I love the Dragonfly. I do have an FRN one in K390. It's not here because it's through in the kitchen, because I actually use that every day. But here is the Dragonfly Taboo in stainless steel with VG10 blade. Now, this one is not so practical as a carry because it's quite a lot heavier, and it's a VG10 blade rather than a K390 blade. But it does illustrate what we're on about here. It's a tiny little knife, but it's relatively hand-filling and has enough of a blade to do most of what you would ever want of a knife. Still probably couldn't spread cream cheese with it, but it's pretty close. So we were looking for other knives that fill this type of criteria. Small knives, little pocket knives, but that can do a big job and fit in your hand in a bigger way than the knife would suggest, or size would suggest. Now, I'll take a bit of time to find it. There is a sort of Spyderco equivalent to the Dragonfly, because Dragonfly obviously has the disadvantage that it's, or the advantage stroke disadvantage, that it's a locking knife. I mean, that's good for safety and practicality and all sorts of other stuff, but in the UK it makes it you're unable to carry it because we're not allowed long knives. But here is the Spyderco slip joint Dragonfly. Now, it's not really, but it's what I think of it as. It's not exactly the same size, but it's very similar. The UK PK that they do is quite a lot bigger. It comes to the limit of the 3-inch blade length that you're allowed. This one, this is the Urban, is almost identical in size to the Dragonfly. It's a little bit wider in every dimension, but other than that, it's very similar. Where it does fall down is it doesn't have the volcano grips which the Dragonfly has, the sort of volcano grips with nice smoothed edges and so forth. I don't understand why it is that the slip joints have to have the most basic, poorest of handle covers of all the Spydercos. If they did them with a volcano grip, I think this would make a great alternative. Now, this one is made in Japan, this one is made in Italy, and that, I suppose, determines the steels, but they're similar in many ways. VG10 and N690CO. I don't know if they compare metal under the sort of chemical terms, but they do compare quite well in terms of how they work and how they function. They're both perfectly serviceable steels. They're both relatively easy to sharpen. In terms of blade shapes, they're broadly similar. There is a little bit more thought goes into the Dragonfly with this nice little swedge at the back, and it appears to me to be just a little better finished. In terms of the handle, you have the thumb ramp and the finger choil, which are kind of essential in making a small knife into a hand-filling, relatively big knife. Maybe it's not quite a 4-finger knife, but it's getting there. It's not far off. I better get a move on, or I'm going to run out of time and you'll all be bored. So let's have a look at a couple of others of this sort of genre. Now, Paddy produced the Pilar. I don't have a Pilar, but I do have a couple of other Vox Naze designs, which I'm quite a fan of Vox knives. I think he puts together a good design, makes them work pretty well. So these are two of his older ones, older than the Pilar, I think. So this is the Suru. Now this is the first time I saw one of these little small knives that really appealed to me. Prior to this, I'd always thought, you know, you want to go right to the limit. But now I don't know if I can work this because it's a tiny little flipper and it's not got a great detent on it. But nah, can't quite get it to flick, but very nearly. Now these knives, again, like the Dragonfly, you end up with this finger choil here, which gives you the opportunity to put this knife in your hand and have pretty much a full hand-filling knife, but in a small package with a capable but small blade. And these, unlike the Dragonfly, are actually quite thick as well. As I say, the first time I saw one of these, it was the UK legal version that Heine Haynes had done, that Al, UK Legal Carry Knives, had, and he sent it round in one of our little early pass arounds, and I was really quite taken with it from the moment I saw it. So I've never been able to get hold of the UK version, but this one, I got this one from Love Them Knives, put a lovely mirror polished edge on it. If you can see that. Don't know if it shows up just how shiny it is, but it's lovely. That's N690 as well, the same as the Urban. This is also made in Italy, and you know, so yeah, there's a lot more in common there than just the finger choil. And now this one is from MKM, Maniago Knife Makers. It originally, the foreign version, I think, has a flipper. This isn't the UK version. This is sort of somewhere between the two, because there's no flipper, which is probably good in keeping on the right side of not just the law, but just the way things are going here. But it is one-hand opening, and it does lock. So this is not really a UK legal carry knife, but it's so unfortunate that it's not, because it's so unthreatening. mean, you've got a great blade here. Again, it's N690. But, you know, it's got a little bit of curve in it. It's not particularly pointy. So, you know, it's sort of non-threatening in that sort of sense. I actually like the FRN handles. Heine Haynes did a UK edition of it. And I think they just made such a mess of what was a beautiful knife. They obviously deleted the lock and instead made it into a detent knife. But it's only got a detent on one side, so it's not a double detent, just a single detent. And they got rid of these nice, I love these blue scales and the orange highlights. They replaced these FRN scales with G10 scales with a really rough texture on them. A bit like they did with the Spyderco WPK as well. And I think it just turned this, which I think is a beautiful little knife. Again, sort of hand filling, but yet tiny. They turned this into something that I thought was really quite ugly. So much so, I had both. I gave the UK one away to my son. Now, well, let me think. We only want 6 really. I'll just show you a couple of others. This one was sent to me by a subscriber in America, just out of the blue. It was very nice of him. No warning. He actually got my address from somebody else and sent this along. This is a Kaiser in S35VN. It's called the WPK, and I can't for the life of me remember what that stands for. I do know, I just can't remember. It's similar in many ways to the sort of Vox knives, but it doesn't have the finger choil. Now that does mean you get a slightly longer cutting edge, but it also means that this is really a sort of 2-finger knife, despite the fact it's the same sort of size. Oops, push the airly moves up. It's a similar sort of size to the Vox knives. I could just line them up straight, one next to the other, pivot to pivot. The handle's about the same size. The blade is very fractionally shorter, but as I say, you get a longer cutting edge because you don't have the finger choil. But you don't, with not having the finger choil, this handle feels much shorter, even though it's pretty much exactly the same length. This is all titanium, mind you, so this is quite a premium little knife. But I think Jesper Vox knives has a better handle on designing these things. Now I'm going to show you. Should only be 6, but we're going a bit wild here, because there's just some knives here that I think are worthy of seeing. Now this is the QSP Parrot, and this is the small version. I really like this knife. It's very, very capable. It's got a nice sort of, I don't know if you call that a Warncliffe or a sheep's foot sort of blade on it. It's got a useful bit of a point on it without being a sort of stabby knife. It's action on it is superb. It's got these denim micarta scales on it. It's a liner lock. Being a left-hander, not by choice, but by necessity, I like liner locks over frame locks, because when you're holding the knife, you see the what would be the lock side. Well, it is the lock side, but you can't see the lock on a liner lock, so it kind of just seems more attractive to me. So you can return the clip round to the other side, as I've done this lefty here, and if it wasn't for the pivot, which doesn't kind of match, you know, you get the plain side and you get the logo side, other than that, it works quite well. Now again, like the Kaiser, you do have this compromise in that without the finger choil, you've got a little bit less to hang on to. But I like this one better. It's slightly lighter. The titanium can be a bit heavy, and it makes it, and it can be slippy in my hands anyway. My Carter is that much grippier, and so it works well. Now, one knife. Now you haven't seen this one from me before, but this one will be coming up on a full review shortly as part of my high-end knife series, actually. In many ways, one could say it's not really, it's not a Shirogorov, but it is a Benchmade, and Benchmades these days do carry a fairly hefty premium. Now, this particular knife is small, there's no doubt about that, but it's still a 3-finger knife, even without a finger choil. It has got a very, very slicey blade in CPM M4 steel, which I think is a brilliant steel. I love it. It's not stainless, so you have to be careful with it, but this is coated, and the only bit that's not coated is the actual edge itself, and as a result, that is cleaned up every now and again through either sharpening or just stropping. Now, but I think of this knife as the mini version of the bailout. Now, I've had the bailout for a while. There was the original version, which was in G10 handles, and I can't remember, it was a 3V blade. They then brought out this aluminium version with an M4, CPM M4 blade and aluminium scales. So this, I actually showed this knife to the owner of this one, and he bought that one as a sort of direct influence of having seen the bailout. So I always think this is the mini bailout. It's sort of a mirror image in a way, in that this is this term reverse tanto, which I never really like, whereas this one is a tanto, a term again I don't really like. CPM M4 again is a nice steel for getting a good polished edge on it. I don't know if it shows on there so well, but it's nice and shiny. Just using the workshop precision adjust. Now, I've not sharpened this one because it's not mine, but I'm actually quite pleased with this little knife, and I think it's one that would make a good everyday carry. The bailout can be just a little bit too tactical, perhaps. And now, finally, and I think is probably the archetype of the little big knife, and that is the Elric. Now, if you watch the Knife Raven YouTube channel, Canadian chap, has a real passion for Sheffield knives, and in particular for the Elric pattern. And I have a few Elrics. I think it's just the 4. I might have another 1 or 2 somewhere else that I can't remember. These are by various people. This one is by Stephen Cocker. And if there was ever the big small knife, or the big wee knife, wee big knife, however you want to think about it, this has a small blade. It's barely more than an inch long, inch and a half maybe, but it's got a full-size handle. If you wanted a knife that was made for the UK, made to be non-threatening, this has got to be it. And this is a design from the 19th century. It was originally made by Joseph Rogers, who it was brought to him by Lord Warncliffe, who I believe had developed it along with his gamekeeper. And Rogers liked the look of it, and they decided that they would make it. This one, as I say, is a Stephen Cocker. I don't know if you can read that. Tang stamp. It's the only thing the thing I like about Stephen Cocker, he gets great materials, he makes great knives, he gets a lovely polish on his blades, but he doesn't have his own tang stamp. He has the knives laser etched. Now this one is stamped, but it's stamped, I think it's made in Sheffield or made in England or something, which I don't really like. I mean, it's a sort of generic thing, which I take it means he probably bought these blades in, which I don't blame him for. There are no blade forgers left. Just, you know, there used to be a whole trade of blade forgers. I was watching a film about a guy the other day that would knock out 2 gross of knife blades every day, so it was a gross of a dozen, but there are 14 to a dozen because, or there had to be 14 to a dozen because there would be breakages and losses in the warehouse. Bit of a rip-off of the artisan, I think, because they're paying for 12 and they're getting paid for 12, but they've got to make 14. But he would make 2 gross. So that's over 300 blades a day with the extras. In an 8-hour day. Just think about that. Mind you, he made 2 blades. This guy was in his 80s. He knocked out 2 blades in just a couple of minutes. But absolutely brilliant. And by eye, because he knows exactly what he's trying to make. And he would just hit them. Unfortunately, he was just about to retire when the film was made, and that was back in the 70s, I think. And I don't believe there's anybody left. However, we do have Stephen Cocker, we do have Michael Bay, and we do have Arthur Wright, Michael and Ashley Harrison, carrying on the tradition of making these knives. I don't know if any of them make their own blades. I'm sure they don't forge them. Even if they do, they'll come out of sheet material and cut out either stamped out or cut out by some other method. But they do make the handles from scratch, and they do assemble the knives, polish them and sharpen them. And I think that's probably all we can ask for in this day and age. They're as traditional a knife makers as you're going to get anywhere today. So anyway, let's leave it at that. I think this is the archetypal wee big knife, and it's a classic British knife, and it still holds its own as an everyday carry tool in this world. So if you're still here and you like this, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more of my videos, then please subscribe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.